Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 141. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. We are pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, Nick. Hey, so this week, slight change in the format. We're doing a book review. I think we've done one once before. I don't remember what that format was, and I didn't bother to look it up. This week, what we're going to be doing is talking about the book Deep Work by Cal Newport. The subtitle is Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And I don't exactly remember who first told us about that. Do you remember?
I feel like it was Josh Duffney.
Okay.
Back in episode 124 is where we have reference to it in our show notes.
Okay, awesome. I feel like one of us might have had it on our 2021 book goals.
Yes.
But I don't remember where that came from, and maybe it was from Josh Duffney originally, so.
Not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, we won't worry about it.
But it was a book goal of one of ours, confirmed. Don't remember who.
Confirmed. Awesome. Okay, so Cal Newport is a computer science professor at Georgetown. He's published several non-academic books. I think his website says 7, but specifically cites Deep Work and 2 others called, A World Without Email and Digital Minimalism. He also contributes articles to non-academic publications like Wired, The New Yorker, and the New York Times. Side note, he actually has started a podcast during the pandemic called Deep Questions, where he's actually answering questions from people who have read any of his books and have questions on how to apply those ideas like in a practical way and, incorporate those practices into their lives. So it's literally, people writing in, and sometimes I think they actually go to a site, record their audio, and he plays their audio on the website, on the podcast. Pretty cool, I think.
Pretty good podcast, yeah. I listened to it a couple times.
I'm methodically churning through it. I think I'm 40 episodes into 130 something episodes. I'm not quite sure how best to listen to it, so I just decided to listen to it in chronological order.
Well, John consumes content like this like I drink coffee, so pretty crazy amount injected into his brain.
I have to say that it's difficult to take notes on it, take notes on audio format, and so I don't know that listening to it all that way has necessarily helped me. I think there's definitely times as I was reading the book where I kind of went, oh yeah, he elaborated on that in the podcast and, maybe came to some different conclusions over time. But not having actually written those notes, it's tough to go back and say, okay, I'm going to re-listen to those 40 episodes to figure out where that was. But let's get to kind of our format, all right? We're going to give reactions to the book overall, and then we're going to go back and give reactions to each section or each chapter of the book individually. So overall, reactions, we're going to answer some questions like, do I believe this idea? Does this apply to me? Does it make me want to change my behavior? And then what will I change to align myself with this idea? We're going to do that again to the book overall. And then as we cover each chapter, we're going to give a quick overview of the chapter and then talk about, each of us answer those questions. So are you ready to get to the overall reaction, Nick?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. The book is written in two parts. Each one has 3 chapters, right? So we're just going to do part 1, the first 3 chapters today. We'll have another episode, which should be episode 142, covering the rest.
Yeah, really good, important note. And that structure basically for part 1 says, here's me selling you on the idea of deep work. And then part 2 is, here's me telling you how to apply deep work in your everyday life. So with that clarification, let's get to the overall reaction to the book. First question, do I believe this? My reaction is yeah, definitely. Like, I found the book really compelling. It felt like it was filling in like a missing piece of the puzzle for me in my life about, his basic hypothesis and what to do moving forward. So I didn't need a really strong sell. Once I started reading, it was really difficult for me to stop. So that was it for me. How about for you?
Yeah, I definitely believe it. When I think back to our past guests, some of them have accomplished some pretty incredible things, and you have to think that they have done some form of this deep work in one form or another, and we've just not called it that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, people who have like, oh, I've written 20 books. I've, this and that and the other. Just like the level of output that some people are able to put out is, pretty amazing. So second question, does this apply to me? My reaction was definitely yes. I don't, a big part of deep work, I think, as we'll come across, is like the flip side, which is shallow work, which you can do like when you're pretty distracted. I think unless you really concentrate on removing distraction from your professional work life, it's just so easy for it to creep in. And right as, every time he would describe like a behavior, I felt like he was talking about me. And I was like, oh, what about if you work like this, or if you work like this, and why it wasn't good. And I was like, oh, geez, I do work that way. And no, it isn't good. Definitely, detracting from my overall value, or my ability to just concentrate.
Yeah. He's attacking all the things I'm doing wrong. That's how I would answer it.
Oh, man.
And it's easy to see that I'm way too connected in general.
Yeah. We'll talk about exactly how, as we get into it. So does it make me want to change my behavior? I mean, for sure, right? Immediately for me. Like, it was actually, I had to stop in the middle of the book and start changing things like right away. Right as soon as he pointed them out and, why they were harmful, I was like, well, I'm changing that right now. Like, I would change it retroactively if I had a time machine. I mean, it was just super, super compelling. How about you?
It definitely makes me want to change, but there's a part of me that wanted to say no to see if any listeners out there would call me out. But I definitely want to change my behavior.
Yeah. So what will I change to align myself with the idea, with the kind of hypothesis of the book? Well, I've already started reorganizing, like I said, how I work, what can interrupt me and when, and even how I schedule my time. So that's pretty much, I think, what I immediately did. How about you?
I'm working on ways to improve my ability to focus deeply. And I started with turning off email sound notifications and desktop alerts.
Oh, man, that's like a really good point. Like, practicing that is kind of like its own thing. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you can't just start and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to start deeply focusing on work now. It's like, it's really difficult. Like, focusing your attention and not getting sidetracked is really difficult. All right. So you can kind of see why we chose this book for a review. It's because we both read it, both reacted like extremely strongly positively to it, and started to really think about, whoa, this could be transformative for our professional careers. And I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are looking to make a professional transformation, right? That's kind of central to focusing on improving your career and making steps forward in your career. So I felt like this, maybe reading a book like this could help people really kickstart that transformation. If you don't know where to start to improve your life and your career, like this would be a really good place to start, in my opinion.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And some of this professional transformation is actually based on digital transformation, believe it or not. I had to get the buzzword in there, but it actually is true.
Yeah, it's very true. And maybe not in the way that we traditionally use that phrase.
Exactly.
All right, so let's get to the actual book. The introduction kind of formalizes the definitions for the things that Cal Newport is talking about. He says, what is deep work? Deep work is, I'm going to quote here, professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push you to your cognitive capabilities, or push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. So that's a very interesting and specific definition of that phrase. So flip side, shallow work, non-cognitively demanding tasks that are often done while distracted, which are easy to replicate and do not create a lot of value in the world. I think he goes on a little bit later to kind of call out administrative tasks as generally being shallow work.
And I just want to point out that smashing that subscribe button is not shallow work.
That's right. And then he comes basically to the central hypothesis of the book, which he calls the deep work hypothesis. It's not just the definitions and what is and isn't shallow work. Here's the hypothesis. The ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare. At exactly the same time, it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive, right? So this is, again, why we're bringing this into a career transformation discussion. The entire hypothesis of the book is, you can be more valuable as a worker, be that employee or entrepreneur, if you are able to perform deep work. Reactions. Do I believe this? And immediately, yes. Like, this resonates like extremely deeply with me. So I strongly believe that work that demands high levels of cognitive function is like the most correlated with high value, right? Like what people are willing to pay for. And there's definitely exceptions, right? There's, work that basically requires access to large amounts of capital. That's something you can't control, right? But the things that you can control are like how well you can perform like really difficult to do jobs that just are extremely demanding and require extreme focus. How about you?
I think when you see people make breakthroughs in our industry, which is technology, or reaching the highest level of individual contributor, for example, I think they've done it. They've done this in some form. And again, maybe we just never referred to it as that, or maybe they never called it that, but they definitely had periods where they needed to do deeply concentrated things to make a big enough impact to reach those elite levels and do the work that added that much value to the field or the world.
Yeah, definitely. And, again, I want to make sure that we say, like, I'm sure there's exceptions. I'm sure there's people who fail their way to the top. But, you can't control those types of things. Like, oh, yeah, this person was, like, just, one of the earliest employees in the company and just got to the top via seniority. It's like, well, you can't control that. Like, what you can control is, like, how effectively you work. So, next question, how does this apply to me? So, I definitely find myself being asked to do work that seems more administrative than, like, deep and, like, cognitive. And I find those things, like, not that correlated like that shallow work that I'm asked to do, I don't necessarily understand how it contributes to the success of my job. And that's not like necessarily, exclusive to the current job that I have. Like it's, across the board, there's checkbox that you need to check, and it's like, hey, everybody, we need everybody to get through this, or, do this, or like make sure that this is all updated. And it's like, well, I understand why you need to do that, but I don't understand how that adds like value to the company, right? Administrative stuff. It makes me want to focus like on that stuff that is deep, right? So there's definitely, like unspoken expectations to like, reply to email like very, very quickly, right? All those kinds of things. How about you?
Yeah. Sometimes just because of the number of emails or asks on your plate, the shallow work ends up getting prioritized when you could still do it, but it may not actually be the most important thing you should be doing right then.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Does it make me want to change behavior? I definitely want to change that behavior. The crowding in of that highly distracted administrative type work over the work that long term is going to most correlate with my success as an employee trying to bring value to the organization that I work for. So, I want to be a worker with high value, right? Regardless of what it is that I'm doing or who it is that I'm working for. So, that kind of motivates me and, guides me towards this idea of deep work.
Sure. I think what I'm starting to recognize is, yes, it makes me want to change behavior, but I just think back to all the output or the outcomes that happened for people who were doing the deep work. And I know we shouldn't necessarily be focused on the outcomes, but the level and quality of the output I have seen and heard about makes me want more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you bug me every once in a while about writing a blog. And I'm like, why haven't I written and kept up with like, an active blog? What is it that's stopping me from, dedicating time to doing that? It's, feels very, like good to do. And it feels like it's correlated with professional success. So why haven't I done it? Right. And it's like, hey, I need to make those changes, right? So what will I change to align myself with this idea? Like, so I am going to do everything I can to maximize the deep work that I do and try to pare away the shallow work, or, maybe concentrate the shallow work so that it is done in a very organized fashion and on a very regular cadence that, is, as concentrated together in time as possible. All right. I'm going to have to figure out like the deep work that I'm doing and like how it's measurable to being aligned with success in my workplace so that I can prove that this is the thing that I need to be doing. And then just figure out how to do that, right? How am I going to do the work deeply that is most aligned with my success as an employee and worker in the organization that I'm in?
I would completely agree with that. And let's not kid ourselves. You can't do deep work 100% of the time. We'll just get that out of the way. It's impossible. You do not have the cognitive capabilities in your body to do deep work all the time. However, for me, I think that I need to take more time that's dedicated to focus, where I put some guardrails around keeping and protecting that focused time. That's my biggest struggle.
Yeah, can totally understand that. It'll be interesting to see how effective we find like the techniques in part 2.
Mm-hmm.
But we should probably get to, just the idea and like how Cal Newport, kind of sells the idea and fleshes out this idea, right? So that's part 1, past the introduction. So chapter 1, deep work is valuable. So at the core of this chapter, he up top kind of talks about how technology is disrupting, the traditional labor markets. He cites some economists who call it the Great Restructuring, saying that, hey, there's groups that are benefiting from all the disruption and others that are being harmed, right? How technology is displacing human labor when that labor is really just used in a way that's easily automated. But there are three groups that are positioned to benefit from this restructuring. And the first group is the highly skilled workers. And those are the workers that either design or understand how to use the complex technology that is really being developed, that's doing all this disrupting. There's the superstars who are at the tops of their fields. And because of the emergence of technology that allows us to work remotely, companies can say, well, I just want to hire, the superstar for a few hours or, to get this project or job done. And that's going to probably displace somebody who's local to that organization who maybe was going to work on that. And then the final group is the owners who have access to capital to fund this complex technology and the development and the application of it. Now, we have to say, we can control how much, focus and deep work we have. We can't control whether we have access to capital. So Cal Newport, points that out right away and says, hey, let's start to try to control what we can control. If I had the ability to control how to get access to, huge amounts of capital to invest, I probably wouldn't be writing a book. I'd probably just be doing that. So he says, how do you become a winner in this new economy? So it's two core abilities, the ability to quickly master hard things, and two, the ability to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed. Direct quote from the book there. So he's really talking about, in the rest of this chapter, about the fact that deep work will help you quickly learn hard things. He references the Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, which we've talked about in that section. He talks about the neurological basis of learning difficult things. And then, the second point, deep work helps you produce at an elite level. And he kind of posits a formula here. High quality work produced is equal to time spent times intensity of focus. So he also introduces the idea of attention residue when you're changing tasks from one task to the other. You can't actually just immediately put something down and immediately fully focus on something else. You just have leftover attention on the previous task, which is why multitasking is so harmful. If you especially switch between a bunch of different tasks, you're going to have residue left over on each of those different tasks. So focus is really the key. Long-term focus on a single task is key to producing at that elite level and having high levels of output. He talks about, the counter examples too. Maybe there's executives at highly placed executives in organizations where all they do is they go from one task to another, and they have a bunch of people who report to them that, bring them information they have to make a decision on. That counter example, Cal Newport says is probably not that useful. Either, what are the chances that you are a highly placed executive at an organization reading this book, trying to revolutionize your career? And even if you are, who's to say that your ability to deeply focus wouldn't actually improve that ability? And in the podcast, he's actually talked about people who said, some of those high level executives, when they're going from meeting to meeting, they actually are performing deep work. They're just intensely focused in each of those meetings on, what it is that they need to learn about the issue that they need to make a decision on, and then bringing to bear all of their cognitive abilities to make a good decision. So, there's an argument that even they're doing deep work. So, on to our questions. Do I believe this? Probably not a surprise at this point that I definitely believe it. Back to kind of the hypothesis and, the distortions in the market. I see that, already. And I see that the most highly compensated work, is becoming knowledge work. Right? Even like in Silicon Valley, like, the first generation of disruption in Silicon Valley was probably, I think, Hewlett Packard and the rise of the computer industry. And at that time, like, the engineers who were working at those organizations, they were white collar middle class employees, right? But that has changed, to today, to those, software engineers becoming, top 1% earners in the economy, making equivalent salaries to lawyers and doctors and, those types of like high end knowledge workers. So that transformation, I've seen it, right? It's probably happened in my lifetime. So how about you?
For a long time, I've been wondering how the people we've talked to who have produced things at elite levels have been able to do it. And I'm starting to figure out how they did it, because they had to have done some of these things in the deep work mindset. Maybe not exactly, but they found a way to find that focus on what was really important and got the biggest bang for the buck for them and their company and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Okay, so does this apply to me? Definitely applies to me. I mean, I've already benefited from it, right? Like, I've sold myself in every single, the last few jobs that I've had, I guess, as someone who can, quickly learn difficult new skills. And I can really see this entire deep work philosophy as a way to concentrate on and accelerate that process, right? I might have been good at it, but I wasn't necessarily great at it. And I think I can be great at it by really paring down and applying, Cal Newport's process.
I think many of us want to raise our game and produce better quality output faster, because that seems to be the expectation as you climb the ladder of individual contributor. More impact, high quality.
Yeah, at a higher volume, right? And higher volumes of high quality has a increased impact, right?
Mm-hmm. And an increased salary.
Yeah, definitely. So does it make me want to change behavior? So I've never thought about the ability to concentrate as the key to learning difficult things, but in retrospect, it's extremely obvious, right? In fact, now that I think about it, like, my work performance went dramatically upwards after being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and, getting medication to handle like that attention deficit. So it should be obvious to me that, like, it's the ability to not get distracted, to be able to concentrate deeply, is the key to, higher performance and generating more value.
It definitely makes me want to change behavior. I know I haven't set aside enough time sometimes for professional development or learn that new skill that I really need to learn until I absolutely have to, aka, when I ran the podcast for a little while solo. So I think focusing a little bit more on that is only going to help technologists like us adapt to the changing industry we're in. It's not that I wasn't doing education, I just don't think I'm doing enough.
Yeah. And then maybe it's just that deep focus, right? That, oh, here's like the firm goal and here's how I'm going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what will I change to align myself with this idea? Well, I mean, I already mentioned, attention deficit disorder. So I can definitely stay on top of my meds there. Like, that's the extremely obvious thing for me. But, more importantly, I probably need to make deep work my top professional priority. I mean, any individual areas that I'm actually working in are probably secondary to my ability to perform deep work in that area, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it doesn't matter like what part of the business that I'm working in, as long as I can work deeply, like, I'm probably going to be successful. So that ability to work deeply is the most important thing to me and my individual success.
There you go. For me, I am going to work to be less controlled by whatever's at the top of my inbox.
Oh yeah, that's
Because
rough.
I think sometimes I just end up going with the hot list instead of the list I prepared to cover for that day. And sometimes you have to, but you can still make progress on the things that need the progress the most.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Let's get into chapter 2, which I think actually addresses some of exactly what you were just talking about there. So, a good transition. Chapter 2 is deep work is rare. So, the general idea here is that despite the fact that we, anybody who probably thinks about this idea of like, knowledge work and high quality output requiring deep concentration, at the edge of our cognitive abilities, like most businesses aren't set up for that, right? They're set up, they do things like maybe on purpose and maybe accidentally, which, compromise that. Like, I would say like, that implication that you should be rapidly responding to communications or, emails and chats, those kinds of things, or maintaining an active presence on social media. That kind of thing is, it's implied that it's important in many workplaces. Open offices, like where you can just bump into people all the time and get easily interrupted. That's all set up, again, maybe unintentionally, but to really keep us from doing deep work, right? So why is that? And this chapter, I think, addresses some of that. Like the first idea is the metric black hole, and it's really easy to measure some things, but I think this concept really is referring to the idea that it's difficult to measure progress when somebody is doing deep work, because some knowledge work is so complex that it's difficult to say, oh, it's 80% done or 90% done versus 30% or 40% done. Especially when it's just, working through solving a problem, be it, a mathematical proof or, developing comparing, contrasting, architectures for, compute. Those things it's just really hard to come up with a metric to measure the ability to do that. So the second idea is the principle of least resistance, which we'll put a quote here. In a business setting, without clear feedback on the impact of various behaviors to the bottom line, we will tend toward behaviors that are easiest in the moment. So that idea that we're just going to like kind of do whatever's in front of us, I think, which is what you referenced, which like give us that dopamine hit that like, oh, I got something done, right? I did something. Like something came up on my email and I answered the email. Therefore, I got something done. It was the easiest thing for me to do and I did it. Therefore, I am good, which like kind of leads into the next idea, busyness as a proxy for productivity. So, it's really tempting to do things that are like publicly visible and publicly visible accomplishments and say, oh, I did that, so I'm being productive, right? You can see that I got these things done, so I must be productive. But the thing that is most important for us to get done is the deep work. So if we're doing a bunch of publicly viewable administrative tasks instead of doing the deep work, then it looks like we're productive, but we're not actually getting the thing done, which is most correlated with value. So, the quote here is, knowledge work is not an assembly line, and extracting value from information is an activity that's often at odds with busyness, not supported by it. The next section that he has here is titled The Cult of the Internet. I'm going to say that he uses the word internet as a proxy for highly connected behavior. So I'm going to say that instead of the internet, which is what he writes. So, the idea is like modern businesses place a high value on highly connected behavior, which leads to shallow work. And mostly because it's complicated to measure the destructive nature of that behavior. And that's, kind of the extension of all these things that he's talking about, right? It's difficult to measure the success of deep work. It's also difficult to measure, the lack of accomplishing that deep work or anything that's, distracting you from that deep work. Spending time disconnected, deeply concentrating on complex tasks is the way that a craftsperson would behave. And that seems old fashioned, right? He talks about a blacksmith a little bit later on in the book. And it's you wouldn't expect somebody who's hammering on raw iron to check their email every 5 hammer blows. They need to heat the metal and then hammer on the metal and then heat the metal and then hammer on the metal. And it's not any of the other things that might be involved in a blacksmithing business that are critically, more important than getting the blacksmithing done. Right. But so this is the final point: bad for business, good for you. Right. It's that misunderstanding about what's valuable for businesses that presents an opportunity for those of us who recognize that, there's an advantage to be gained by being able to concentrate on deep work, to be able to cultivate that skill. And then, actually do it, as the ability to do deep work and the performance of deep work becomes increasingly rare, right? So, this is kind of the gateway, for you to become one of those highly skilled workers and, eventually, if you keep on working at it, a superstar, right? If you do that, then you're putting yourself in a position to be highly rewarded for your labor. And I think that's kind of the key to all of this. So do I believe that? Right. That's a lot of ideas, right? But it's one after the other in logical conclusions, logical order, drawing a logical conclusion. It's really difficult for me to read this and not just immediately believe it. I see all the things about, distracted behavior, and I see how it keeps me from concentrating deeply on very difficult problems to solve. And I think that, in retrospect, it's solving those kinds of problems that is the most valuable thing that I could be doing as an employee. So yeah, I believe that, if I figure out how to do it, I'll become, more valuable. And it's kind of easy to tell everybody about it because, it's a hard thing to do. So who's actually going to do it? If I was super selfish, I guess I'd tell nobody else about this book.
This is really about John wanting to become a superstar, just to get that out in the open. And that's cool. But I'm just going to say, do I believe it? 2 thumbs way up.
Awesome. So how about this next question? Does it apply to me? Yeah, I have direct personal experience with this, right? If I have the skills to do something, to learn things quickly, I displace and win the job when other people are applying for it, right? I get selected for the project when other people wanted to do it. So, I've directly experienced this.
Absolutely. And I've experienced the other side, which is feeling busy all day, but at the end of the day, you go, what did I really accomplish today that was what I needed to or felt meaningful to me? It's not that you didn't do anything, but maybe the stuff you did was just firefighting, and that's what it felt like all day long. You can still do the firefighting, maybe just not all day.
Yeah, I have to agree with you 100%. I don't want to position myself as this black belt deep worker. I think what I'm trying to do is say I'm a recovering shallow worker, right? It's very, very easy to get into firefighting mode and just keep an eye on your inbox and just answer every email as it comes in, respond to chats immediately, look at Twitter and, look at LinkedIn and see what's coming, your way that way. But it doesn't necessarily lead to at the end of the day, feeling like you've, as you pointed out, oh, I got a lot done that was important.
Mm-hmm.
So does it make me want to change my behavior? I mean, hopefully we've already answered that question.
Yeah, we answered that.
It feels so obvious, like that concentrating on deep work is a path forward to professional success. And I think, again, that's kind of why we're doing this book review, is because we want to, as we came to this realization, we wanted to make sure that all of our listeners, got exposed to the idea and had the opportunity to read this book as well.
We're aiming for the next level, and we want you to be too.
Yeah. Okay, so what will I change to align myself with this idea? So I think that my primary work focus should be deep work. And I think I kind of said that. Like the secondary thing is, what am I spending that deep work time on? And that's important as well. But the very first thing that I should be doing as part of my transformation is minimizing that shallow work and maximizing that deep work. So I'm trying to be less connected during the day, concentrate my social media time like as a task with a specific goal. Maybe that's like mostly broadcast, catching up with specific people, but to have that be time bound with an agenda, right? These are the things that I want to get done, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is the time that I have to do it. It's only 20 minutes. And at the end of that 20 minutes, I have another thing that I need to move on to.
For me, I'm going to say forcing the disconnected time to focus on the right stuff. Like you said, you have to determine what that is. I can't help but think back to Eric Brooker's episode in episode 140, where he forced himself to disconnect for his family, to be present. And I think a little bit of that same mantra is what you need for the deep work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so finally, chapter 3, deep work is meaningful. So again, I think this is where the blacksmith story came in, and he talked about how we have this respect for physical trades as having this like meaningful life, achieving high levels of craft, and how that can be extremely meaningful. But we don't have that with knowledge work, right? So Cal Newport is making the argument that we can have that connection between knowledge work and meaningful craftsmanship through the process of deep work. So he makes 3 arguments here: a neurological, a psychological, and a philosophical argument for going deep. And the neurological argument, I think, harkens back to Daniel Coyle again, and saying, this is why, deep work results in increased capability for you. And the quote here is, in work, and especially knowledge work, to increase the time you spend in a state of depth is to leverage the complex machinery of the human brain in a way that, for several different neurological reasons, maximizes the meaning and satisfaction you'll associate with your working life. Maybe it wasn't maybe it wasn't the Dan Coyle section here. Maybe it was a different set of people who were talking about how older people had learned over time to kind of suppress the effects of like negative stimulus and just focus on the positive effects of positive stimulus. So you just have the ability to like focus and learn to suppress certain things and enhance other things. The psychological argument for depth. This is, I think, aligned with the research that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi did. Yes, I did listen on how to pronounce that name. If you look up his name, you'll see it's extremely difficult to sound out. He's the author of the book Flow. So his research actually showed that people were more likely to enjoy work than relaxation. I found that to be extremely interesting.
Same.
Yeah. Work gave them like flow-like cues, such as goals, feedback, and challenge. On the other hand, relaxation time tends to be unstructured. So people's happiness was correlated to the amount of time spent in flow-like states. That's what Csikszentmihalyi was studying. And work gave them more access to those flow-like states than relaxation did. And then finally, there's a psychological argument for depth. And, again, this is where Newport kind of revisits the idea of craft, and says like, hey, physical trades, you can really associate with high levels of craft and high levels of skill, but there's nothing about a trade being physical that is actually linked to craft. You can have a knowledge-based job and do knowledge work and have that be a high level of, approach that with a high level of craft and achieve high levels of craft with that type of work just as well. And if you do that, then you're going to have like a lot of meaning and a lot of enjoyment in your work, right? It's not the type of work that brings meaning. It's the high level of craft that brings meaning. So do I believe this? This section on the talent code and like the ability to kind of, suppress certain things and enhance certain things definitely rang true with me. I experienced like that kind of psychological feedback as I put things into practice. It's, definitely believe it. Definitely believe it. How about you?
Yes. We know from 3 Signs of a Miserable Job by Patrick Lencioni that if your work is not meaningful to the organization or you don't feel like it is, you're not going to have job satisfaction. So I will also say that there is a difference between meaningful to the organization and meaningful to you. Hopefully there's an intersection between the two, but there won't always be. It's
probably true that just because an organization asks you to do something doesn't mean that it's meaningful to them.
Sure.
The next question, does this apply to me? So at first I thought that it applied less than the other sections that we talked about, chapter 1, chapter 2. It's interesting that Newport thought about this as, meaning. I guess I'm experiencing more like meaningful work in my professional life as I apply this idea of deep work. There's a positive feedback from the increase in productivity, and that feels good. He calls it meaningful. Like for me in practice, it was that like effectiveness and then that positive like feedback feeling that impacted me more than the idea of like this philosophical like dedication to craft. But I think that is just a little bit more abstract, right? That probably comes maybe with time where you just have like pride in the type of work that you can do. It's just, I think with knowledge work, it's a little bit less tactile. Like you can't point to a thing and say, this was the result of high levels of craft necessarily. A white paper, an architecture, it's a little bit more difficult to associate it with that. And I think maybe that's the point of that section, that we just need to like, push ourselves to associate that a little bit stronger.
Yeah. There's something that makes you feel great about completing a task that was really challenging that maybe you didn't even know if you could do at first. And I think that's what I got out of some of this. It could make it meaningful because you overcame maybe an obstacle that was put in front of you as part of this work, or meaningful work to the organization that just needed to be done, or you saw a gap and did it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And one other thing I'll say is I can't help but think back to episode 127 and what Tom Hollingsworth was talking about in terms of burnout and those things that are still left on your list after months that just grind away at you. Maybe they're big things, big rocks that need to move that you haven't made progress on. And some of those things, hopefully, we can make progress on with the deep work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about like a link between not doing deep work and burnout. Maybe that's something that we can explore a little bit further. All right. Does it make me want to change my behavior? Interestingly, like, I think I'm torn on this. Like, my gut reaction was no. Like, there's, increase in meaning doesn't really mean anything to me. But, I guess I can see it as a motivator in retrospect. Like, having gone through the process of trying to do more deep work, I definitely got this, like, positive feedback from being more productive and a positive feedback from, like, learning new things. And, maybe as I do more, like, I will get even more of a positive feedback from that, like, appreciation of craft. It's all in retrospect, right? I don't know that it's motivating me to start. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Sort of, you've known it's been meaningful all along, and this is just reinforcing it.
I guess that what I'm saying is that it didn't get me off the couch to do this in the first place. Right. It was the pragmatic parts of it of you can be more productive, you can be more valuable, you can have an economic advantage. That got me off the couch to start doing things.
Okay.
After doing it, now I see, there's this positive feedback about feeling good for being productive, feeling good for, learning things, for like, having that like meaning and maybe like achieving that knowledge. But, like the flow states, that like doing good work and feeling like, hey, you've accomplished a bunch of things. That didn't start the process for me. Like, it might help me continue the process, but it didn't motivate me to start things. How about you?
I can see that. I think that, yes, I definitely want to change behavior. I know I've experienced, especially when you were offline for a bit, working on your new house, and
mm-hmm.
I think I experienced this meaningfulness more deeply because I needed to keep Nerd Journey going for you, and because I felt like we were making a difference. So that was a great feeling, and regardless of the amount of work, I never burned out. To go back to our burnout subject, because of the meaning inside the work. And it was, some of it was definitely deep work in that figuring out the right things to say when you're the only one talking. You can't riff off your co-host.
Yeah, I can see that. That's so interesting. Yeah, okay. We're going to have to explore that burnout idea, I think, a little bit more.
Sure.
So, last question. What will I change to align myself with this idea? So, again, I was way more torn about this than you were. So at first I thought, not a lot. I'm already going to be aligning myself with deep work, around learning and effectiveness. But, the more that I think, the more that like the idea of high levels of craft is really appealing. In retrospect, my Twitter handle is vjourneyman for a reason. Like, I always associated technology and what we do as kind of, going through that apprentice, journeyman, master, like, sequence. It reminded me, and like, there's these echoes of these mentions of other books that I haven't read, but the titles are very evocative of this. Shop Class as Soulcraft is one. The idea of getting meaning out of doing work, and then Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Inquiry into Values. That was the other. And I'm wondering if they address this, like the idea of, craft as bringing meaning to life. So something that I'm definitely going to explore, and I'll try to report back.
So I'm going to say that what I found really interesting here was this idea of the rarefied approach to your work in craftsmanship. In other words, you get a lot of independence in terms of creating that deliverable that you need to put forth. There are usually success parameters, right? I can paint my canvas however I want it to look, as long as I meet those parameters. And that endeavor of creating is actually extremely meaningful for me, and I know it is for a lot of other people too. And I actually think that it comes down to the process over outcomes discussion that we had back in episode 19. But wow. He's talking about enjoying the process so much that it actually creates meaning and produces the outcomes you want through the deep work.
That is an excellent link that I think that I had not connected to when I read this, but I'm going to have to go back and revisit that, because I think that's an amazing insight. Amazing insight.
Every 100 episodes or so, I have one.
It's a little bit more than that.
Okay,
All
50.
right. Okay. Well, that's the end of chapter 3 and the end of part 1 of Deep Work. Before we summarize, is there anything that pops in your mind while we were talking before we close out?
The only thing I would mention is one of the books he references is called Rapt, R-A-P-T, by Winifred Gallagher. It was about attention. There's a story of someone who wrote the book after getting cancer and talks about constant checking of email causes stress and that losing focus causes you to fixate on what's wrong with your life. Kind of makes me want to read that one. Since it was referenced in there, I pay attention to book recommendations and other books, so... As you know, the reading list is quite long.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a really, really good point. We'll add it to the list.
Add it to the list.
All right, so we're going to be back next week with part 2 of Deep Work, which covers the practical parts of how to apply these ideas. So hopefully we've intrigued you with this rather long book report on part 1 of the book. Hopefully our passion and how we positively reacted to reading this comes across, hopefully. But at any rate, let's maybe get out of here, right?
Sounds good. Tune in for part 2. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder and deep work to do, of course. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
All right, farewell listeners, and tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman, from Nick Cordy at Network Nerd _, signing off.
Go deep or go home.